This week, Donald Trump and Tim Cook cut the ribbon on a brand new Apple factory in Austin, Texas.
Only one problem with that story. The factory opened 6 years ago.
Today, we dig into tech's complicated relationship with the politician formerly known as the Donald.
I'm Alexis Scordato, and this is Future Forward.
I am Stephen Rosenbaum. Let us launch. So, Alexa, let me just start by saying I'm really sorry I'm going to have to put you through this. I know it's going to be like a half hour. The reason why the tech version of the Donald story is so important was made clear to me last week. And I spent the week thinking about whether or not we needed to do the show on it. And then it's like, there's so many data points. There's really 3 big chapters, but we can't not do it, you know?
Yeah. I get it. When I first saw, though, that any listeners should know, I saw the script, I saw the show notes, the list of articles, and I was like, oh no.
Yeah, well, I don't think I'm going to change your mind on that. All right, so 3 chapters today. First, why tech execs are cozy with Donald and what that means. Then we're going to look at the tech situation, the tech sales to, I always mispronounce the Chinese company, Huawei, right? And then finally, we'll look at 2020 and which candidates, if any, are popular among the tech crowd. So huge shout out to our friends at IEEE Spectrum, who provide us with great editorial support and give us access to the wonderful Glenn Zorpat, usually every other week. We don't have him this week, but all things being equal, depending on our Thanksgiving schedule, he will probably be back with us next week. All right, so let's just dive in. Had you seen the Trump Tim Cook moment? Like, had that already shown up on your radar?
No, it didn't. I actually mute Trump on Twitter. Like I don't follow him, and like mentions of Trump are actually muted from my timeline. So I'm kind of like in the dark.
All right, but this is all right. So just for our listeners who are muting Trump, as Alexa is, he went to Austin. It was the day that there were big hearings in Washington. He put on a big show at this Apple factory, big photo op. Cook obviously understood he was giving him kind of visual cover. And then there was this kind of jaw-dropping moment when, Trump said, "I'm really glad to be here. It's so exciting that with my help, they've opened this new factory in Austin." And Cook kind of sidestepped. He didn't say, "Excuse me, Mr. President, but you're not opening anything. This has been here for 6 years." He said, "I want to thank the president and his team for something generic, like making this possible." But it definitely was a bullshit answer. Like, it was a
so
flat out.
I thought it was horse shit. Sorry.
Yeah. No. It was a bullshit answer. And just so that we're clear that, Trump, even if he made a mistake, and everyone makes mistakes occasionally, he then tweeted out 2 hours later, another "so excited that Apple's opening a factory in Austin." So even if like his handlers came up to him afterwards and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, Mr. President, yeah, you kind of got that. We gotta walk that back." He's like, "No, and I had kind of an odd reaction, which is for Cook, and this is going to sound terrible. We're going to get hate mail from me saying it, but there is another famous character in Cook's life who has a famous reality distortion field. That was what everyone said about Jobs.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was like, oh, wait.
Yeah. That he would literally say, "I want this object or this phone or this whatever to behave this way," and he would make people that worked for him scuttle off to try and build impossible things.
Oh, so you're saying you have a reaction that like Tim Cook is like sort of like predisposed to loud, obnoxious personalities and kind of just like taking it.
No. I wouldn't say Jobs was loud and obnoxious. I just think Jobs had a strong will, and he said this phone should not have an on-off switch, and all the engineers said, "What are you talking about?" He pushed people really hard to get what he wanted, and so I think there's got to be some part of Tim's personality that at least understands how you manage people like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Other than that, I think there's no similarity. I mean, I think Jobs built amazing things and built an extraordinary company, and I think Trump only makes up stories and tears things down. So no, I would hate to be accused of putting them in the same. But reality distortion field has some strange similarities.
So, I mean, not that you're giving Tim Cook an out or making an excuse, but are you just sort of saying like, okay, you know what? He's used to working with personalities, and in some ways, he just, you know, he fights those battles as, uh, in his own way, and he didn't
How
want to do it in this case.
on Apple's timeline, how far out do you think they project development?
10 years at least.
I think 10 years. So, so he's got to be planning for factories and suppliers and customers changing and new product development. He's got to at least have things in a pipeline that are 3 or 4 years out,
Hmm.
that are being built, chip evolution and all these things. So by that measure, even the worst case scenario, Trump wins again in 2020, it's still, while it's within his visual timeline, he's got a plan for a company that essentially doesn't rock the boat, get killed by tariffs, get Apple's relationship with China is very complicated in both directions,
Hmm.
and mostly he needs Trump to not fuck it up.
I agree.
And so giving him a press op, while distasteful, probably doesn't damage Apple's economic outlook at all, and he can just. But it definitely was humiliating.
It's
Definitely.
Yeah. No, and it's tough. And I mean, this ties into the sort of the articles, like the Bloomberg one, right? The headline is Tech bends its knee to Trump. Tim Cook is not alone.
All right, let's be clear. When we say Bloomberg, we mean the news organization known as Bloomberg.
Not the now presidential candidate.
Which we're going to get to. We're going to get to. That's later in the podcast. But let's jump to the second piece. Tech bends its knee to Trump. I guess here's the thing I couldn't have known about him. I mean, I knew all of the history of him as a New Yorker pretty well, actually. But I'm still a little surprised at his willingness to hold a grudge and be incredibly vicious to people that don't behave in the way he wants them to. And be able to
you?
well that he's able to point the institutions of government in such a way. The FCC is one example of that. The Federal Trade Commission is another example of that. I think as a tech executive today, you have to know that mostly you want to just stay off his radar.
Yeah.
Which is, again, humiliating.
It is humiliating. I mean, I never expected him to be presidential when he was elected. And I feel like if you watched any episode of The Apprentice, like I'm not as surprised as maybe you are.
Well, I didn't watch any episodes of The Apprentice.
Okay.
And was shocked that it was in such a platform for a presidential campaign. But I guess, so let's talk about this Bloomberg article for a second, because it turns out, Cook is not alone in his obsequiousness.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 10-penny word. So let's just run through some of our greatest hits of people who have sucked up or in the process of sucking up to the Donald.
Mark Zuckerberg. He had dinner at the White House with some employees. So that's one. Here's another one.
Peter Thiel, obviously, but he's always been on that side of the fence in ways I didn't understand. Libertarian's a tricky thing, and if you take it to its far extreme. I was going to say left extreme, but I'm not even sure that's right. It's far. I don't even know what it is.
Hmm.
Um,
We can say that Google and their uh, the military contract with the Department of Defense. There's
yep.
sort of an example too of big tech companies sort of wanting to win over the government.
And wasn't there was a story which Amazon was the winner of a big military contract of some cloud computing infrastructure play,
And
and Trump
Microsoft
came
is,
in
yeah,
and gave it to Microsoft.
yep.
Um, yeah, we should go back to Zuckerberg for just a second because we no reason to let him off the hook that easily. Um, I, I don't mean to sound sympathetic to either Cook or Zuckerberg, but you know, when Zuckerberg knows that his platform was used to essentially to put Trump in office. Um, he's in a uniquely lose-lose situation now, um, in which the right-wing folks cry foul anytime there's any kind of an attempt to, you know, limit something or manage something or, I mean, there's really almost no way that he can not anger Trump and the right-wing establishment if he makes anything that resembles a fake news edit decision about things that are demonstrably untrue.
Yep.
Even for a guy with as much power and money as he has, I gotta believe he loses sleep over that.
I I don't know. You know, what's so interesting about these guys, whether yeah, really, Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook, Peter Thiel, it's like these guys have, FU money. What good is having FU money if you're not willing to say those words? This is like what's perplexing me. It's like you would think the more power influence you have, that if you truly were in it for the right reasons, that you would have some principles that kind of govern your decision making. And I think what is so disappointing to me is that I don't know what these guys stand for.
All right, but I'm going to push back on that a little bit. So I'm going to give you the keys to Facebook. Here you go. Mark, wakes up tomorrow morning and says, Alexa, I think I've done all I can do here. I'd like you to step in and do your thing. What button would you push that wouldn't have consequences that would be as likely to be bad as good?
I'm just like, no, don't run political ads. Get out of the game.
Okay, done. No political ads. But what about political speech?
Okay.
So, because that's everything, right? That's global warming. It's the border. I mean, everything's political speech.
I would probably create an algorithm that was like programmed with like training some type of machine learning algorithm to indicate like opinion, right? And like as you read status updates on the platform, right, it could basically show you like how certain phrases or sentences, like where they fall on a spectrum, and then show you other opinions about that same topic.
So, as a journalist, I literally that makes my head explode because, no, because there's a certain that's how media has tried to solve this in the past, was just to say, well, whenever we get anyone on the show to talk about global warming, we got to get a denier to sit on the other side of the table so we can have balance.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no balance. 99.999% of all scientists on the planet agree that we're in the midst of climate change. So we make up this completely unreasonable one-to-one conversation, which maybe is compelling television, but is fun.
Right, but I think that, so. Yeah, I mean, you nailed it by saying like, oh, journalists and the media have tried to solve this before, but then the entire institution of journalism got disrupted by the internet. And so now that we're turning to platforms like Facebook as our source of news, how do you apply journalistic principles to that media? In which case, if the problem right now is that consumers on Facebook are only seeing one-sided arguments based off of their social graph, their network, or sort of targeted political ads, then you should take a page from the journalistic playbook and say, for every piece of content that consumers are experiencing that fall on one side of the spectrum, suggest and offer a counter argument to that. Like,
So we'll this is fascinating, and I'm so you're saying if I go and read something on CNN that says the Democrats had a really good week in Congress last week and made really good legal arguments, that Facebook ought to put a Breitbart article next to that that says the Democrats had a terrible week and they didn't win anything and there's no case here. Move along.
yeah. And that people who are seeing the Breitbart article should then conversely see whatever, Washington Post article about something.
All right, we're gonna put a pin in that for another day because I'm so absolutely sure you're wrong. That like, no, because what you've just done without meaning to is elevated Breitbart to journalism.
I'm saying that if, in the absence of the political ads, that consumers are going to share Breitbart articles organically, then the only way to counter that is a one for one.
So let's jump to the article that was the headline that I liked the best of this category, which was Elizabeth Warren calling out Trump's private dinner with Mark Zuckerberg as corruption, plain and simple.
Mm-hmm.
And you can hear her saying it, right, in her slightly preachy, but from the soul, from her heart. Like this is like
Mm-hmm.
this isn't complicated.
She's like my
This
favorite teacher in high school, Mrs. Pisani. This is like older chemistry teacher who like you never wanted to disappoint.
yeah, yeah. No, look, I I I think, and I think by the way, this is the topic of this episode. I think tech's position in politics is really complicated, right? Because on one hand, you know, Warren's going after, billionaires, kind of, lining them all up and taking all their money away. Of course, she's not doing that, but that's the fear on the West Coast in the billionaire club, and probably wants to break up some of these big, powerful tech companies. And on one hand, you can understand why on paper that all makes sense, but in real life, like people who might have actually been supporters of hers are going to have, people tend to vote, their self-interest. It's going to be very hard to put the power and passion of your companies behind someone who's essentially saying you're the problem.
Yeah. No, I mean, what she's saying is super controversial because all of these institutions she's attacking, they are media, cultural institutions, and then they're also like businesses that arguably are like some of the most important, um, I guess, business entities in the American economy.
Yeah. And I'm really puzzled as to what we should do. If I were a tech leader today, I think my starting position would be, how do I stay out of the crosshairs of, how do I not become the tweet du jour of Donald Trump when he decides he's going to go after somebody and attack them? And presuming I can stay out of his radar, that would be a really good outcome. But then if he decides, no, I've made you the bad guy today, I think you really probably want to, just wait for him. That's why I think Tim Cook's response is probably, unfortunately, the right one, which is you smile and nod, you take the press hit, then you go back to running your business, and you hope that Trump will trade that little press avail for not hitting you up on the same taxes, on the tariffs that he seems to be hitting everyone else up with.
Hmm.
Which brings us to Huawei. We've talked about this on the pod before, and it's gotten more. The more I read about it, the more complicated it gets because I guess U.S. companies, which I didn't really realize, U.S. tech companies, they're a big buyer of U.S. technology.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought the issue with Huawei was that they were a seller of potentially Chinese spyware into the U.S. economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've yet to really come across a truly one directional business relationship. I sort of just take this stance or opinion that like everything is so interconnected in today's world. And so there's always like a mutual dependency on any relationship.
Yeah, because on one hand, if you're Apple, you want to sell phones in China. On the other hand, you need China to be assembling U.S. parts that you're shipping there. And then in the third way, you really don't want to be sucked into the Chinese editorial censorship model. Like it's a game of three-dimensional chess that I don't envy them playing.
Right.
But like let since neither of you nor I are Huawei experts, um, I guess I just imagine. Here's the creepy scenario, and then you tell me if I've gone too far. You're a small county city government somewhere in the middle of the country, and you need to replace your phone system. And Huawei's technology is dramatically less expensive than competitors, and you are spending limited taxpayer dollars. And there's no actual evidence that Huawei is Chinese government spyware taking over the U.S. telecom industry. But the way Chinese behaves in its own territories, in terms of how it uses the web and listens and tracks people, it wouldn't be hard to imagine that since Huawei, I mean, it's a pseudo-governmental company, right? I mean, it's not a private firm.
Mm-hmm.
So what I guess I don't understand about, the U.S. companies are all essentially going to Trump and saying, please, please, please don't cut. We need them as a customer. Like they're a big piece of our, so there's their concern is economic.
Yeah, I think that isn't that sort of the root of all of this, which is like, what are the principles that govern our business transactions? And as much as I think we would like to believe that we are principled buyers, at the end of the day, the principles that actually result in transactions are really just around cost.
All right, let me read you.
So
Let me read you a paragraph from the Washington Post article. Senators led by Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Tom Cotton asked the president to suspend the granting of licenses until the Commerce Department briefs Congress on the national security implications. And then there's a quote. You have said to yourself that you did not want the U.S. doing business with Huawei, the senators wrote. National security experts widely agree that Chinese companies cooperate heavily with the Chinese Communist Party, and Chinese government is thought to exercise considerable influence over Huawei in particular. So essentially, just to summarize, they're saying it's spyware. Just know that.
Yeah.
And yet the one thing we know about Trump and tech is whoever gets in front of him, kisses the ring, tells him how brilliant he is and how wonderful he is likely to get him to pick up the phone and call what's his name, the head of the Commerce Department. I can't remember his name. Doesn't matter. And say, do this. You know what? Send out a couple of exemptions to these companies because they were nice to me.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to a couple of other interesting topics. There's a great Gary Kasparov on Trump and Putin piece that was in chessbase.com. Mm-hmm. For those of you who did not read it.
I've never been to this website, by the way, until you sent this over. So.
Chessbase. Yeah, me neither. But it's and Kasparov is a remarkable truth teller in this.
Yeah.
And knows. I mean, he's a chess champion. Um, Maybe Putin thinks like a chess champion, but I think it's fair to say that the Donald certainly does not.
Right.
Um, did you find what he had to say surprising, or maybe just the fact that he said it?
I'm not sure if it is surprising. I think it like one, I don't consume a lot of interviews with
Chess
chess
champions.
grandmasters. So I actually think it's a great piece of content. Just like if you want perspective and you want a different voice commenting on something that we hear a lot of sort of same old types of commentary on.
All right,
And
well,
what was a highlight for you?
I, I just think the number of people that speak out against Putin and then find themselves uh, poisoned in restaurants. Uh, I think you have to be incredibly brave and driven by a real passion to step out from what I'm sure is a very nice life in the chess world
Hmm.
and become, I mean, the key under his name is chess grandmaster and activist.
Right.
Those don't strike me as things that necessarily fit in the same box.
Yeah.
Um,
But again, this is what I was saying before. He doesn't have FU money, and he's
no.
doing it. So, like, how come these other guys can't do the same?
Well,
CEO,
all
Fortune
right, all right,
500 company, and activist. Let's get more
all right.
facts.
So I'm going to tell you what I think we're going backwards in the rundown, but I'm going to tell you what I think the answer to that is. I think Mark Zuckerberg believes deeply that Facebook is a global platform for good, that it is connecting people around the world, building new communities, opening people's eyes and minds to different things around the world, and that much like Tim Cook, he needs to survive this chapter, fix the problems internally as best he can. I'm sure that, but understand that they're incredibly complicated. And by the way, how the Facebook platform gets used politically is a far more complicated problem all around the world. You know, when you're sitting there in Mountain View or in the valley and trying to understand about a political skirmish going on in a market in which you don't have nearly the amount of internal understanding, I think who's right and who's wrong gets really blurry. So I don't think it's a matter of fuck you money, is I guess what I'm saying.
Mm.
I think it's about how much of your power are you willing to risk or trade away if you think that you're net doing good work. And I don't think
So you're
I
saying
know a
it's
lot
like
of people.
an ends justifying the means, and it is more long game or chess oriented.
Yeah, no, right now I don't think a lot of people feel that way. I think he's done enough things in the last 2 years that there aren't a lot of people that are signing up for the Mark Zuckerberg fan club at the moment.
Yeah.
But all right, so we have just a little bit of time left, and I want to get to a couple of these candidates. So the other big headline was this headline from John Malone. So probably most of our listeners don't know who John Malone is. John Malone is very much behind the scenes. He's a massive, massive, massive player in the cable television business, not just in the U.S., but around the world. If you go and Google him, you'll find that he has been, through Liberty Media, a buyer and seller and bundler and consolidator of the cable business for a very, very long time. And he's kind of a noted libertarian, and he came out, I thought somewhat uncharacteristically, and said he was against Trump because Trump causes chaos. And I think it wasn't a political statement. I don't think it was meant to be political. I think it was just kind of an honest observation.
Yeah, it was more like this is someone this is a leader who goes about his business in this way. I mean, he even commented on like his team building skills or lack of the fact that Trump doesn't build a team. He just sort of sees himself as like the biggest loudest voice in the room.
Yes, and then he came out and said, and this was a couple of days ago, um, he wants to vote for Bloomberg.
Yeah.
And then this morning, Bloomberg, after a couple of weeks of preparing, came out this morning and announced that he is in fact running for president.
So one, are you surprised? And two, do you think he can win?
So I don't play the can he win game because I think I think it's too early, and I don't ever want to support a candidate because I think they can win. I don't think anyone will become president of the United States by being the I'm not Donald Trump candidate. And I think it's a mistake for the Democrats to try and find somebody who's, quote, electable. I think it's,
Yeah.
we're 9 months away. I think the process should run the process. I will tell you, I worked part-time. I had a role in New York as the New York City entrepreneur at large under the Economic Development Corporation back when Bloomberg was the mayor, and I found working with him and his team to be extraordinarily productive.
So you're a fan.
Yeah. I mean, what am I supporting him for president? I'm not supporting anyone for president until the process runs longer. But I think I mean, I like his position on guns. I like his position on, on the environment very much. I think he puts his money where his mouth is. I've spent some time at the Bloomberg Philanthropy in New York, and it's just a very serious, focused, hardworking group of people that are, I don't want to say unemotional because I don't mean that exactly, but just very focused on tangible results, measurable results. He's not wringing his hands about gun control. He built Everytown USA and put his money where his mouth is and is working really hard to solve that problem in a very analytical, focused way.
I'm not saying he's not smart, hardworking, and that his platform isn't something to be desired. I think for me, I just can't get over this, I don't know, this increasingly plutocratic world that we live in. When it comes to the convergence of the public and private sector, the, private wealth and its influence on, public, on the public is, for me, problematic.
I think the problems that see, here's what I think. I think the problems that we face, let's talk about global warming as an example. They require a mix of analysis, action, diplomacy, focus, and I worry that our political system, just doesn't. So here's a perfect example. So in New York, there is a new technology institution called Cornell Technion on Randall's Island. When Bloomberg began that process, which was while I was involved with EDC, he understood that it was going to not have any impact on the city or open or be a big institution until long after he was out of the mayoralship. So there was no ribbon cutting, there was no there was none of the self-aggrandizement strategy. It was a long view, and it was meant to build a technology campus that would add to NYU and add to Columbia and add to CUNY and add more resources. But what I admired about it was the antithesis of the way politicians think about projects, which is, will it help me get reelected? Can I put my name on it? Will it make me famous?
Yeah.
All right, so we're running out of time, so let's just talk about a couple more candidates. So anybody, of all the technology people, I know a lot of people that are supporting Yang.
Yeah. Sorry.
Listeners, that was just, we had a little audio problem. It sounded like laughing, but it wasn't really.
I mean, I can see the appeal. It actually it's amazing to me that he's gotten as far as he has.
All right, what about Buttigieg?
I think he looks like a winner, you know.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. He looks like a winner.
I think so much of, I think, American politics is like rooted in how people show up, and especially in battleground states. Like, I see Pete Buttigieg as someone who will appeal to a lot of voters who we need to win.
All right, so let's just so right now we're talking about the 77-year-old New York Jewish former mayor versus the 14-year-old mayor, gay mayor. Those are our.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so I think we're gonna have to call this a draw.
We're
'Cause I don't think we're
gonna
gonna.
call it a draw.
I don't think we're gonna pick a mayor on a president on today's show, but we are gonna have Thanksgiving this week for those of you who are listening on Monday or Tuesday. So I want to remind everyone that turkey makes you sleepy. So feel free to take Friday either going to the mall or napping.
Everything in
Whatever
moderation.
Everything in moderation. And we are out of time. But we will be back with another fabulous show. This was, by the way, this was show 104. 104. Have an excellent week. See you next week.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.